Welcome to Toot Your Own Horn, Music Matters. Today I am here with the one and only Ben Hipp. How are you, Ben?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm terrific. I am so excited for you to share with our audience your story. Would you be so kind as to tell us from the beginning how you chose your instrument?
Sure. We started middle school band where I'm from in fifth grade at the time. And I started a little later than like I missed the first maybe 9 weeks or I believe we were still in a 9 week system back then of band. And I don't remember, I guess it was a scheduling thing or whatever. So the band director told my mom that we needed to find a private tutor. And that was before we had even, purchased instruments or anything like that for the band class. They were still doing music theory and everything like that. And so I think that we were just looking for a private tutor that was local. And I think, for my parents' schedule, it was like the closer the better. And so there was a clarinet teacher in the neighborhood. So I became a clarinet player. What? That was the easiest, I guess, possible. I think when they asked me, I said I wanted to play trumpet. And I know that my mom searched for a while, and I remember her making phone calls. Gosh, I was probably like 10 years old. But yeah, and she was not able to, and she came back and said, "Hey, well, there is like there's a private clarinet teacher here in the neighborhood," and she's like, "You could walk there." And I remember it being like, "This would be so easy," and so I was like, "Sure, why not?" I didn't know any different, so sure, and so I became a clarinet player. Yeah, I played clarinet for a little while, and then somewhere in middle school, I played a little bit of bass clarinet, and then in high school, I went back to playing clarinet.
And what was it to you? Like, what did it mean to you? How did it fit into your life?
I think I was just one of kind of those happy-go-lucky kids where it was not game-changing or earth-shattering or anything like that for me for the longest time. It was probably not until, my junior or senior year of high school where I was really like, "Oh, I am into this." I was just a band kid along for the ride for the longest time. I was fortunate to be a part of a great band program, and I know that that's made me really complacent, or I think a lot of people have pointed out that it's kind of made me have an entitled view of band because the programs that I have been with have been so lucky that we've gotten to do the same thing multiple times. I just participated in my third Macy's parade back in November. We've done multiple presidential inaugurations, gubernatorial inaugurations. We were joking that we wanted to play at Midwest. We've applied multiple times with an organization I play with now. And I was like, oh yeah, that would be like my third Midwest performance. And everybody's like, do you realize that this is not real or normal? It's just where you're from and then the university you went to, and like it just all lined up for you. And that's not everybody's normal experience. And it was really an eye-opening situation to have that conversation and go, wow, so I guess you're right. Not everybody plays at Midwest once in their life, much less, three times. So, and the same for the Masons trip. We joked about how no South Carolina band has ever done that, not in the rain. And we really upheld that tradition this year. So we did it in the rain.
So you're floating along, playing in middle school, playing in high school, enjoying it. I assume you had friends in band.
Yeah, yeah. I would say pretty much all of my friends were in band, but I did other things. I was still like, I was on the yearbook staff and I did so many other things. Band was just like a piece of what I did. And then I always tried out for, all state band, region band, that kind of stuff. I started just doing better and better. And I was not the kid who was like preparing for that or whatever. I mean, it is what it is. And then all of a sudden, I think one year I just did a lot better than I'd ever done before. And it was kind of sparked me to like, oh, could you just imagine if I practiced, like, or actually practice like more than we have to for class or to, not be embarrassed or whatever in class. And so I kind of dove into it and then things got a lot more rewarding and I really did get into it. And so I started college and I actually majored in music.
Oh my gosh. Where
So
where'd you go to college?
I went to the University of South Carolina.
Mhm. And so what was your journey there? Were you a music ed, music performance?
I was a music ed major and did that, and I was doing the performance certificate route, and I also did an art degree. So there, while I was there, I did a lot. I'm one of those people who never knows when it's like you're doing too much until it's way too late. But yeah, I did a lot, and I was really into the art studio thing. I really and the art professors were always trying to get me to do more art, and they kind of would pick on me, like, if I had to, like, I would never leave my horn in my car because it was too cold or too hot. It's mostly here, it's too hot. So I would bring my horn into the art building, and they would be like, "Yeah, you really, yeah, not here. You need to do that less. You need to do art more." And then it was the same kind of situation, of course, with the when I would have to take my art supplies, my portfolio into the your big giant, canvas portfolio into the music building. And a lot of times I would store that in my locker in the music building. And a lot of the music professors would kind of tease me and be like, "Yeah, maybe the art stuff stays in the art building. You need to focus on music more and less art." And it was kind of, I always used to kind of get tickled with how both of them were doing that. And I was also super into swimming at the time and was doing some rec swimming at the university. And both of them were like, "You could not come in here smelling like chlorine, and that would be great." And then somewhere in the college experience, I had a really interesting instructor that we ended up doing the winter guard with. And I kind of got into color guard and took a very long journey through color guard where I still teach today. And I actually am back at the University of South Carolina teaching color guard there now after teaching high school for more than 25 years.
What did you teach in high school?
I was the early college advisor, the dual enrollment advisor, that kind of stuff. So transitioning kids in those programs, helping them find, like, hey, if you're interested in going to Clemson, Clemson's going to take this class and they're going to give you a credit for this. Or if you're interested in going to the University of Virginia, they're going to take this class or they're not going to accept this class. So when you're choosing your classes, as a high school student to take early college or dual enrollment credit, let's make sure that you're taking stuff that is going to benefit you, because don't just take it for the sense of taking it. And we had students who were working on associate's degrees there as high school students, and we had students who were just basically stacking classes so that they could enter their college of their choice as, maybe a second semester freshman or maybe a sophomore. And I to the point where I had some kids that ultimately entered as juniors because they chose the right classes for the university they were going to. In a lot of ways, that doesn't always work out, because they end up going to a different school than they planned to go to as a sophomore in high school. But yeah, so I did a lot of advisement for that, but I also taught the color guard everywhere I was teaching. So
So how did you get from a music ed major to being in that role? How did you do that? Where did that take a twist?
well, so I it was time for me to student teach, and, like, I think the student teaching experience really showed me that I did not, in fact, want to be a band director. And sometimes I regret that I made that decision so quickly, and sometimes I'm like, yeah, that was probably the right choice and the right journey for me to deviate from that, because I enjoyed playing my horn did not mean that I wanted to teach other people to play their horns. So
Well, but the
um,
choices were so limited and the pathways to getting you there are so few that that's part of the problem, right?
right. There's so much you don't learn and you don't know. And I think we all kind of see things through colored glasses, and everything looks so glamorous from certain standpoints. Like, I kind of still get tickled at those memes that are old, but it's like, what I do, what my mom thinks I do, what my friends think I do, what I actually do. I'm like, God, that really is most high school kids when they're looking at their profession. It's like they have a very different view of what it's actually going to be. And so
Mhm.
I did enjoy teaching, and I had been teaching some color guard at some high schools in college. And that kind of became like a niche that I fell into. And so to get into doing the dual enrollment teaching, it was actually because they hired me as the color guard instructor, and I was like, "Well, I'm not gonna move there unless I have a full-time job," and they were like, "Well, you've got your teaching degree, so you can do this," So I ended up just kind of doing that, and because I was fresh out of college at the time, it made sense because I could advise people on how to, you know, look at their college, their degree programs and stuff.
Did someone train you for that role, or did you have to figure it out yourself?
Oh god, no one trained me for that role. Like, I don't I feel like I showed up and was sitting in an empty classroom, and there were just some, like, books on the table, and I figured it out, and I made a lot of, Excel spreadsheets and worked with some teachers who have become good friends of mine who are now all assistant principals in the districts that they're working in, but we all kinda worked together to figure it out, and we just kept really good track of stuff. I feel like in my biggest bragging right, when I left that position, they ultimately had to hire 3 people to do the job that I was doing there, and I was like, "God, that makes me feel really good." It also makes me feel like maybe I was a bit overworked there, but,
But you
yeah.
created the entire workload and you created the entire structure, and so I'm
Oh, yeah, 'cause I had no idea what I was doing.
curious. Right, I mean, that's really impressive, and so I'm curious, what did you tell music students to do?
To not take the music appreciation class. As a music major, that was I feel like who we kind of almost made fun of was, like, the music we call it Music 110, or it was called Music 110 at my university at the time, and those kids would file in droves into one of the big auditoriums, and they just always would come out looking so lost and clueless, and then music kids who were not music majors would take that class, and they would be like, "It's awful." And I was like, "Oh my god, so let's just keep the kids out of that because we certainly don't wanna turn them off from music." So, you know, like, why can't you take an ensemble credit and that be your fine arts, hours for that degree program, but
And did you encounter any students who had unusual interests? Did you have to guide them through other portions of the school to help them make connections? Or like, I'm curious to know, were there more diverse thinking about what you could be in music, or was it pretty much just teaching and performing?
I did have some kids who had some unique interest and especially in the music realm, like, music production wasn't a degree program when I was in college, and did have a student who was in the band that I taught that I knew from there, and he was also in my classes, but he really wanted to go into music production, and we learned a lot about that together because I would have to basically sit at the computer and Google what a music production degree was and where it was offered and what kind of classes he needed. I mean, mostly what I was doing in that role was really trying to get students through their core classes, like getting them out of English 101, 102, 103, really get their core classes out of the way so that when they started college, they could go directly into their degree programs, which I think, or at least in my opinion, that really keeps kids more engaged because, taking 2 years of core classes and not really delving into your degree program very much kind of takes the wind out of somebody who's very motivated a lot of times. So I was trying to get them prepared to, make sense. So if we could move the English requirement off the table or any of the basic computer science things, the things that they weren't per se interested in, then let's get those. Let's take psychology. Let's take sociology. You're going to be required to take that pretty much anywhere you go. So let's get that off the table as a high school student, which because you're going to have to take it anyway, and then you're getting a dual credit. You're getting your high school credit. You're getting your college credit. You're getting an AP weight for it. So it's really boosting your GPA. Let's get that out of the way so that when you go to college, you can jump directly into your degree program. And if it doesn't work out for you, then you're still early enough in the process where you can make a change instead of, I think a lot of people don't realize until they're juniors or seniors in college that maybe they picked the wrong major because that's really when they're getting into the more difficult level classes in their degree program. Music majors are not the same. We're pretty much inundated with music classes from the get-go, but I had a lot of friends in college who didn't even start like their degree program classes until their junior year. And it was like, gosh, that's really late to figure out that maybe you don't want to be a biology major.
For sure.
So
So when you graduated and realized you didn't want to be in music ed and you took this pivot, did you still play the clarinet and the bass clarinet?
I did for a little while, and then sadly, I had a performance, and it was at my sister's wedding. I played for her wedding, and it did not go as I had hoped, and it was probably one of the first times as a young adult where I'd had a performance that just didn't go as planned, you know? And I don't it wasn't for lack of preparation or whatever. I think maybe it was, if anything, because it was my sister and we were close, and I think it was an emotional thing that I kind of let my emotions take over, that I just didn't deliver in a performance setting like I would have liked to. And I think that there's sometimes where you can't necessarily prepare yourself for those kind of emotions. But yeah, I played to her coming down the aisle, and I remember looking up, which I had said I wasn't going to do, and I saw her, in her wedding dress and everything like that, and I just got a little emotional and didn't have a great performance and didn't recover well from it. So it took me a little while to recover from that. And then some friends of mine at the wedding, had kind of made comments about like, wow, never heard you miss like that before. And I quit playing.
Mm.
It took a toll on me, and I didn't touch my horn for about 7 years.
Wow.
And it was therapeutic in a lot of ways because I did come out of college pretty burnout on playing. And I think that also had to do with, I mean, maybe not wanting to be a music head, or a band director at the time. So I did take a very long break.
Do you think you were never gonna play again when that
Uh,
happened?
I don't know that I thought I was never going to play again, but I think there was always an excuse as to why I wasn't going to play again. So I had gotten some invitations. People had asked here and there, but a band director that I had taught his color guard for many years ago, Scott Rush, who was at Wando High School at the time, reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're doing this thing, Charleston Wind Symphony," and he was telling me about it. And I remember going, "Wow, Scott, that's great. I'm really happy for you." And he's like, "I didn't call you to tell you about it." And I kind of was like, "Okay." And then, I think we've had this standing like joke that was like, "Well, you don't tell Scott Rush, So I said, "Okay, so what can I do?" And he was like, "Well, I want you to play." And I was like, "Uh, I haven't played. I haven't touched my horn in like 7 years." I was like, "So we need to start easy." And he goes, "Okay, well, you can play bass clarinet." And I was like, that I can do. I did that in middle school. Sure, why not? That was easy." And he found me a horn, and that horn was a really nice horn. It was a Buffet Prestige. We took it and we got it overhauled and everything, and that horn played like it had been thrown out of an airplane. And I struggled with that horn so much, and I put so much time into like trying to play again, trying to sound like me, trying to have a good sound, trying to have technique, and like, God, my face hurts all the time, and getting back into it. And eventually, I guess after about a year and a half of that, or maybe 2 years of that, I was doing well with my job, and I had some adult money. And I just kind of decided that I was like, well, let's look into buying a horn. Let's look into buying my own horn, because this one is not the answer. And I'm not gonna last very long if I have to continue to fight this horn. And so I did. I went out and I shopped eBay for a long time, and there were some really great horns on there, or appeared to be great horns on there, and a lot of too good to be trues. And because I was still teaching school, there were a couple auctions of too good to be trues that slipped through my fingers, and I finally was just like, you know what? Okay, we'll try a different way. So I reached out to pretty much every music store in South Carolina, and I said, "Look, here's what I want to do. This is the horn I want to buy. I would like to try it first." And most of them told me no.
Wow.
That they were not going to pull one horn or multiple horns in, to allow me to do that. So through that, I asked several of my serious clarinet friends, like, "Well, who would you use? Where would you go?" And someone connected me to Heather and Alcides Rodriguez in Atlanta, and I reached out to them, and and I said, "Hey, I'd like to come down and take a lesson. I would like to try some horns." And so Heather was amazing, and she said, "Okay, well, let's do this." She said, "I want to make sure that if you're going to drive all the way to Atlanta, we have multiple horns for you." And so maybe it was several months before they had the horns in stock, and she called one day and said, "Hey, we've got 6 here for you to try." And so I went down and played the horns, and the horn that I thought I wanted was not the horn that I wanted. And they had a couple Toscas, and I played one of the Toscas, and my phrase for that horn is I felt like it sounded like warm buttered cheesecake, if there were such a thing. And I felt like it played so easy and so well. And I remember sitting there going, "I will write you a check for this horn right now. I'm not leaving without it." So I did that, and I did that for that was a little bit over 10 years ago now. And I have played that bass in a couple ensembles, but I always feel like I'm a clarinet player by trade. And I guess that's how I started to realize. I was like, gosh, my B flat, my A, and my E flat do not play the way my Tosca does, my bass does.
So you played
Um,
bass primarily for a big chunk of time, it sounds like, and that's what got you going back and wanting to be more involved. Is that true?
yeah, yeah. Well, I had an ensemble, or well, I guess I had 2 ensembles that I played the bass in. One is more like a summer thing, Poinsett Winds, out of Furman University, and then I was playing with Charleston Wind Symphony. Because I've still been teaching color guard this whole time for 20, 30 years in the state, so I knew all these band directors and everybody who's in the ensemble, and there were quite a few people who were, from college or even former students that I had had that were playing in these ensembles, so it was a very comfortable setting. And then the more, of course, I did that, the more people would reach out and be like, "Hey, can you do this? Or can you do this? Or whatever." And so I started playing clarinet again more, but definitely again realizing even after I'd had, my clarinets overhauled, they didn't play the way I thought they should.
So I want to go back to that really bad moment, though. The wonderful thing about your sister getting married, but at the same time, it sounds like prior to that, you had been such a comfortable place that no one had ever criticized your playing, and that was a real blow because you actually were criticized. Is that accurate? It was the timing of it because it was your sister's wedding, right?
I think so. I mean, yes, I have been criticized by like professors and like my private teacher, but that's different because you feel like those people, it's constructive criticism, like they're always trying to make you better. Though, I mean, I would say, I think this is probably not uncommon knowledge, but I kind of, my last couple of years at the university, I had a kind of a tumultuous relationship with my private teacher.
Mm.
But a lot of that was because I started taking him from him in high school as I was not planning to go to the University of South Carolina at that time. And I wasn't necessarily even planning on majoring in music at that time. So I didn't, we didn't think it would be necessarily a conflict to start with him so early. But yeah, and I really enjoyed that in high school, getting to leave school and go to the university and participate in their studio and stuff like that as a high school student was really awesome, especially my senior year when I did decide I think I'm going to pursue music. And so I felt like I definitely had an edge, with a lot of that. But I was definitely not used to criticism that wasn't constructive when it came to my playing. And I think that I had been one of those people who had been doted on for so long. Yeah, it was more than a hard pill to swallow. But like, and it was some of my very closest friends who I am certain they meant no harm by it, but it was just one of those almost kind of like, this is not usual for you. And maybe they were trying to be comforting, but I think I was upset with myself that I had felt like I let my sister down. I remember my mom even made a comment that she was like, "Well, that was," I think she said something like, "Well, that's not what we're used to," or something like that. And it was just kind of like, and I know it was supposed to be the kindest possible way to say that, but it's still like where I was in my headspace was not there was nothing anyone was going to say to make that better for me because I felt like I let my sister down on her wedding day,
Well,
so.
I think that's also a music thing in the sense that while a lot of people assume that we are not smart enough or good enough to do anything else but music, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but the general public, because the general public doesn't necessarily have the highest opinion of musicians, right?
Right.
We do these soft skills, and what they don't understand is that we're fiercely committed to the development of them because they set people at ease and they engage with the public in a way that is not through words but through emotional undercurrent, and that there's a lot of value to that in terms of helping bring people together. And because of that, we are incredibly hard on ourselves because although our form of entertainment isn't like, like the theater, it is a form of entertainment that we take very seriously, not just to entertain, but to cajole and to nurture and to support and to include and to create this sense of unity. And when you violate that as a musician for yourself, it kind of destroys you for a minute.
Yeah, yeah, for a while, for sure.
And also you lost your, if you think about it, because these stories have been very interesting for me to hear because there's a common theme to when people stop. They also lose their rock, like their ensembles that they've been playing in, the teacher they loved, or they fall out with their teacher. So you lost your ensembles, your teacher you had for too long, and then this happens. It's sort of like a
Yeah,
perfect trifecta. And that seems to throw people out of the box when
yeah,
everything changes.
it did, and the interesting thing that happened as I started playing more and more again, and that lesson that I had with Alcides Rodriguez really triggered me because it was probably the first lesson that I had taken since college, but it was so positive in a way. I mean, and I'm sure that I sounded horrible because I had just gotten back into playing and I was still so out of shape and just out of practice, but he was so kind about just the way, and it made me go, "You know what? I should probably take more lessons." So I started seeking out other people. So, I took from Gretchen Roper at Charleston Symphony, and I drove up to Columbia multiple times and took from Joe Eller, and I really had a conversation with Joe early on. I don't think it was the first lesson, but we got several in. He said, something like, "I wish more adults would have your viewpoint on this. Like, hey, there's something I can still learn. There's something I can get better." He was like, teaching adults is completely different than teaching kids and or college students even. And I was like, I had not thought about it that way, but I was like, there's nothing on the line for an adult to go in and sit down. Like, okay, if I make a mistake, in this rose etude, I haven't disappointed anybody. I haven't let anybody down. I haven't paid some crazy tuition to be here that is going to waste because I made a mistake in the rose etude, or sometimes if you're just not as prepared, as you would have liked to have been as a college student, it's okay to be as an adult. And I have really sought out taking lessons from people that I kind of always wished. So I reached out to some of the Juilliard faculty and I've taken lessons from some of them. And it's been amazing. Every experience with somebody that I kind of always wished I had taken a lesson from has been great. And to the point where I eventually got the confidence to circle back to my college professor. And a couple months ago, I don't know, I don't even want to say it was a lesson, but I think that we had a therapy session for both of us and we got to talk about so many things. And it was great. And it was so therapeutic. And it was like, yeah. And I felt like that did a lot for my confidence in playing too. And just a couple little, gems that he had given me probably 25 or more years ago, he was just able to re-highlight and just he said some things like, "Hey, remember when I told you this?" Like, or this little exercise right here does a lot to like center your tone. And I was just like, gosh, I have not done that exercise in forever. And so and he of course then made me play some things that I was still uncomfortable with. Like I wish I knew the rose etudes by number these days, but it was like if I love rose 9, it was like, well, we're gonna do rose 1. And I was like, yeah, but I don't like that one. And he was like, still? And I was like, still? And he's like, good, we're gonna do it again. So it was really great to have that moment, but also to not to feel any pressure. Like, if it didn't go well, I didn't have to see him next week, but it actually went so well. And I was just like, it's such a huge weight lifted. And, maybe some things that I perceived as a student, I really realized as an adult, these things weren't real. So,
Well, we always have a lot of monsters in our head, especially when we're younger trying to learn this stuff. It's very
yeah.
hard to learn to focus and play the clarinet. I don't know about you, but I'm always flooded with ideas. And so learning to be very focused, it was really because how my brain would just get lit on fire. And it was like narrow it in. And then the minute you stop doing that, you're flooded again with ideas. Does that happen to you?
All the time. And to circle back to something that you said earlier about like musicians and the soft set of skills, though, it's like I was like the skill set that I learned as a musician is why I think that I've been able to build and make my business successful. Mostly what I do is apparel, costumes, flags, print work for pageantry arts, marching band, cheerleading, dance team, lots of tracksuits and jackets and backpacks and embroidery and everything personalizable you can think of for those activities. So I'm still very closely related to the band activity, but the self-discipline it takes to, learn skills like embroidery, like it's a really expensive machine that has a lot of really expensive repairs that you have to be super careful and meticulous about. And feel like the reason I had the self-discipline to learn it was because of what I learned through music. And I have a policy with my business that I only hire students or just employees that have grown up through band, and who understand the activity that we are selling to and understand the quality level of what we're doing. And, I always say if we wouldn't wear it, we're not going to sell it. So if it's a quality, like if it's the fabric or whatever, if you wouldn't put it on your body, if I wouldn't wear it, I'm not going to sell it.
When did you start that business?
So I guess I've been doing it all along, basically right out of college is, because I would employ my art skills to like draw flags for people or do flag designs or whatever. And then that developed into, Photoshop and Illustrator skills as, digital printing became a much more affordable thing for bands. And then I guess we really in 2018 is when we really officially did the legal paperwork. I worked for another company for 15 years out of Florida, and I sold as a sales rep for them on the side, and a lot of people just bought my designs through that company, and that was great. But in 2018, I decided I was like, you know what, I feel like I can do this for myself, and I can do it better, and I feel like we've been doing that ever since. So
That's amazing. And you were able to then you let go of your teaching job because you're so busy.
I did that. Yeah.
Ben, if somebody was listening to this podcast and just loved your story, what would you say to them to get them to choose to play a wind instrument right now?
Absolutely. Just do it. All of the things in your head that are keeping you from doing it are superficial. I have recently learned through a friend whose parents have started in their, I guess, 60s or 70s. They picked up horns because they didn't do it younger, and then all of their kids have done it. And they've become jealous. Like so they found private teachers, and they're just like, yeah. So I go once a week and have my flute lesson because I always wanted to play the flute.
Right.
And it was we talked about it at a wedding, and I was like, "Oh my god, that's so cool. More people should do that. Like, why not?" So, give it a shot. What's holding you back?